Hi again, everybody. Please welcome director Carol Morley. Hello. Thank you so much for coming to this.
No problem.
We did a Q&A together 8 years ago, or was it 7 or 8 years ago when it first came out. And it was really powerful to watch it again now, just because reflecting on sort of the connections you make and the choices you've made. And I suppose one of the things that comes out in this film is a lot about perception and how people perceive you. I'm just jumping really quickly into a question. I will open it out to you guys. I've got a lot of thoughts and feelings at the moment.
We could speak for hours, probably.
Yeah.
Actually.
Watching it again, it made me think of your film, The Alcohol Years. And in that film, you're like a detective in your own story and like finding out what other people thought of you at a time. And in this one, you're the detective in Joyce's story.
Yeah.
And I was wondering where your relationship with Joyce's story began and how it developed.
Well, one thing I will say that is having made The Alcohol Years, which was a documentary about my scurrilous past in Manchester, I felt like I had permission to make a film about somebody else that I didn't know. I mean, I did know myself, kind of, but... and so with Joyce, I was on the Underground, and it was a copy of the Sun newspaper, which obviously I don't buy. I did after that, actually, but anyway. And on like page 7, there was the headline that you see in the film, and I just and there was no picture of Joyce with it. It was the picture of the bedsit, because nobody got the picture of Joyce. And I read the article, which after more research, turned out there were a lot of inaccuracies. In fact, so many inaccuracies in the article that people that knew her didn't recognise her from the article. So when I started to find people that knew her, because I put those adverts out, and Martin, who's in the film, brilliantly, and here tonight. So I think it was reading that initial article, it was the lack of information, but also this thought of somebody dying in their flat with this, and how, we don't know, but dying and never being discovered in such a busy place in London. And I think the detail that got me was the television flickering over, and this sort of sign of modernity in the modern world, and in such a modern world that we've created, that in that urban environment somebody could go so missed, and it just didn't make any sense. So that's where it began. And of course it was like anything, it was before social media. And when I met the local reporter, and that's how the story came into light, because local reporters will go to inquests all the time to look for stories. So that story, well, he found the story and reported it initially in the local paper, and he offered to sell that story, to Joyce's story, to what he knew from the inquest, to the Evening Standard for £50, but they turned him down because they said nobody would be interested, which I think is indicative of what was, where people's interest lay about a story like that at the time, I guess. But So my interest came from this enigma in the article and Joyce, and wanting to, I think as soon as I saw the article, I thought, I don't know who she is, I don't know if I'll ever find out anything about her, but I want to make a film about her. And what I meant to say is it was pre-social media, for those young enough not to remember that time. And the reporter I met, he said nowadays, if something happens to you, they would immediately pull down a photograph from social media, which is why in a lot of murder cases or tragic incidents, there's always someone laughing at a party as their photograph illustrating the news story, because they'll just pull it off social media. But there were no photos of Joyce.
I really love how you have all the reactions to people listening to her voice or looking at various details you've brought up, and the way that you tell her story is just really honest and brilliant, like full of contradictions. And I think that's quite rare, because usually a filmmaker could choose like one aspect and just run with that. And I really like how there are so many different choices in the film.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, when it comes to making films, and certainly to an extent, you know, making documentary, there is often a requirement somewhere along the line to create a narrative or a story that is unproblematic and that irons out those contradictions, and that becomes something that everybody has the same conclusion about, and or you know, comes to the same conclusions or something like that. But I think for me, what fascinated me about Joyce was that she became, you know, we don't know who Joyce was. I mean, we don't know who she was. She can't speak for herself. So the film becomes about the remains of somebody and how we all survive ultimately in people's memories and in people's, if we're alive, or, you know, people's opinions of us. And so we are created, and our identities are created by the people. And I think that for me became the most fascinating element of it, and the most revealing element, because that Joyce existed like we all do, because people are looking at us. And as soon as someone stops to look at us and acknowledges as being part of the world, do we actually exist anymore? And I think that's why it was so important to bring her in a weird way back to life, and to acknowledge that she really mattered, and that we all passed her by. And I didn't want to make a film about blame as well. And so I think if, you know, you could press in the film for wanting to see the family or wanting more answers, but it seemed more of a tribute to Joyce to not exploit all the answers and give them over easily in a journalistic way, I think.
I really like the way you build a lot of the story through mood and the aesthetics. Like there's lots of blues and greys and the music, and then that those scenes of her sitting alone watching, as if she's watching the interviews of the people remembering her, like it in a really, this might sound really far out, but when I was watching it, it made me think of It's a Wonderful Life with George Bailey, when he like, I wish I'd never been born, and he gets to see like that whole way he like fit into other people's lives, or other people's, like how much he meant to them.
I think it was really important from the beginning that it wasn't a film made up entirely of interviews, because although I don't know Joyce, I didn't know her, we can only imagine what happened and what it was like for her, especially in the flat at the end in the bedsit. It felt important to give her a voice of some kind, and I think the songs that we knew she liked and the mood is, I feel that's her somehow, and so it felt important to create a space for her voice, even though it's not exactly there.
But the musicality of it is really important, and I think like when you see her singing along, singing on her own, there's a sense of emotional resonance that you find like when you identify with a song and you feel seen. And like I wondered if you could talk about that aspect.
Yeah, I mean the song in the film is actually inspired by an Agnes Varda film. Can anyone guess which one? Like who's no, which is Cleo from 5 to 7, where I love that film so much. And in fact, when I was when we were trying to raise money for Dreams of a Life, I would often talk about Vagabond as well, if people know Vagabond, which is another Agnes Varda film, where she looks at a dead person, and Agnes Varda had actually seen it like Citizen Kane. And I saw this like Citizen Kane. You start with a dead person and you try to bring them to life through other people. But the Cleo from 5 to 7, and that song in Cleo 5 to 7, which is so perfect, perfect a suggestion of somebody's mind at that time, without, and obviously there's lyrics and there's stuff that you can connect to and relate to, but there's something about music And weirdly, when I know this is really strange, but when I saw the article originally, it's like, when I saw it originally, I thought, I'm going to make a film about Joyce, whether I find out about her or not, and I'm going to put songs in it. I can imagine her as a singer. I don't know why I thought that. And when I think it was Martin I met, and he said she always wanted to be a singer. So then it felt like it was really important to bring a soundtrack to her life and to give her the dream that she'd wanted of being the singer. And then that song itself is so poignant. Because the lyrics themselves are about people, because it was said that by people that the reason they didn't feel that Joyce had gone missing, if you like, was because she was so popular. And that song is about that, those lyrics of that central song. So I felt music was her, giving a place to her, and also a place for the audience to put themselves as well.
I think I ought to hand it over to the audience now. So if we've got any questions, don't be shy. Yes, down here.
To what extent, if any, do you relate the film to the movie Still Life, for instance, which is about people who may know it, others may know it here, about people who die and have no one to attend their funeral?
Yeah, I mean, that came out after, didn't it? I have to admit, I haven't seen it, but I feel that it seems to me that after I made Dreams of a Life, I became the person that everybody sent articles about people had died in their flat and been forgotten. And I think it happens a lot more than we know. Maybe not for 3 years or 2.5, 3 years, but I think the circumstances of people dying alone is big, and also. The clean-up people, the people that have to go in. And one of the really moving things, so when I was making Dreams of a Life, I did try and it was close to when it had happened, and the Housing Association, the authorities weren't really particularly helpful in having a film made. And when it was eventually shown on TV, I got an email from the guy, the bailiff that had gone into Joyce's flat. And I remember just like crying, because it was this really long moving email, and he said, "Thank you for putting a face to the scene that I saw." And so I know enough about Still Life that it's the clean-up people, isn't it? The people that have to go in. So. And
do you have a view about, there's a fleeting reference to the fact now, it's 40 years on since the election of Thatcher, who said there's no such thing as society. Now there's a fast rise in the number of people living alone, especially the elderly who lack social care.
Well, I mean, it really resonated with me that where Joyce's flat was above a shopping centre that had been built during Thatcherism, where 250,000 people went every week. And the flats, the housing association flats above it were really Warren-like and very difficult to navigate. And I spoke to a woman that lived there. She phoned me from my advert and said that she'd had to call an ambulance one night and they couldn't find her. So I always felt it was sort of tied up with that. And I think Martin did say Joyce voted Conservative once or sometimes. Somebody said they thought she might have voted Tory, but she worked in the city, and so it felt like it was kind of tied in with that, the life of the city, the life of presentation. The sort of the rise of the idea of the individual, definitely. So for me, I always felt I don't feel any of us belong to our family, and I feel we probably have, I probably have less in common with my family and my, everyone's dead now pretty much, or my mum and while she was alive. So I felt Joyce didn't belong to them, but at the same time I felt that it's not that I wanted to protect the family, but I felt like the story was elsewhere. Because if you start to do that, if you started to involve them, it becomes quite problematic. Although, you know, that was a part, you know, there were those discussions. Yeah, that was a very memorable screening. Yeah.
I've got a question just there.
Oh, sorry, I was going to ask the same question. I guess, so someone's already raised the point about kind of like Thatcherism and the structures on which like a tragic individual story like this like sits on top of. And I guess the other structure that runs very clearly through it is something like patriarchy and like the position of men and women in society. And I wondered what story were you trying to tell then, and have you ever had any like kind of feminist critiques of the way in which women are treated in society, and for example the inability for her to escape what seemed to be like continuously abusive relationships, or the way that people continuously assumed that she wanted to either be in a relationship or be married, and that was the only way out of what seemed to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've said all the answers as well, really. But I when I set out to make the film and to bring Joyce to life, I don't think I was doing it in any political or way of thinking about those things in a specific way. So it was more about, and I think it wasn't I think maybe in some documentaries I feel sometimes someone has already written the essay and that people are there to give the quote for what the director feels this film is about. And I really didn't want to do that. So I felt that I wanted to include everybody that wanted, and of course I met people that didn't want to be in the film. Everybody that agreed to be in the film knew that they were putting themselves on the line by being associated with such a story. And I certainly wasn't making the film to give them a part. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like you're going to play the part of somebody, you know. So it was more about let's explore what happened, let's see, you know. And I think then what emerges, and I think does emerge in the film, and it has had like it has been taken on into academia and explored, which is to me really exciting, and certainly from a feminist point of view, a race point of view, and all of that. But I wasn't making the film about you know, it didn't feel this is going to be a film that talks to black women. This isn't going to be a film that talks to women. I wanted to make a film for everybody. And so of course that you can't help as a director or a filmmaker bringing in your own preoccupations. But I don't think it was a theoretical film, if you see what I mean. But I'm really happy and excited it's gone into the academia, and then people have amazing things to say about it that I pretend I thought originally. But also I think that when I mean, it's not really an answer to your question, but Joyce did end up before the bedsit in a domestic violence unit, and when and I couldn't get, you know, that quite rightly, those organisations are very closed. They do not give information about people that have been there, quite rightly. But when there was a cinema release and everything, but it seemed like when it went on TV, they did a big trail of it. There was like this trailer constantly for it. It's like, whoa. And when and I've got my phone number I still have that phone number on the website, and somebody phoned that had been in the sheltered accommodation with Joyce, and that was really amazing. And I did get a lot of follow-ups really to that, but she was like, my daughter saw it and she went, that's Auntie Joyce, and she remembered Joyce lavishly bringing bagels and smoked salmon is it smoked salmon you have with them, bagels and salmon into the unit, and being very glamorous. And I spoke to her for hours, because everybody that came to me that I felt a personal responsibility to carry on the conversations and to make space for them. But I never wanted to pigeonhole anybody, I suppose.
I do think, like, when I was watching it again this time, there were things that I like picked up on that I don't know if I was that sensitive to maybe 8 years ago, like the woman who's saying like there's nothing worse than being 40 and single, like as a woman, or I think the friend who kind of very cheerfully talks about how like I could have taken advantage of her, and that sort of like, I think now we have quite a different climate about like awareness about thinking about those kinds of attitudes towards women, and particularly vulnerable women.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I love that about films, when you see a film at a certain age and then you see it again and you have this completely different relationship to it. I mean, I was saying to Sophie before we came in, I haven't actually seen Dreams of a Life for years. So, you know, it's really weird. I think so much of my life was so bound up with it, and because it took 5 years to make, and then there's talking about it for a long time that I haven't seen it. So it's almost like a bit of a myth in my head. It's sort of quite an odd relationship to it, but you know, so I think I decided not to see it for about another 5 years, so then I'll see how I feel about it. Yeah, but I think that's interesting, and I think with Dreams of a Life, it really when it came out, you know, different people got very different contact with it and different feelings about it and connections to it. What was yours back then, though?
I think I was just really sad,
Yeah.
but I don't think. I mean, now I'm closer to her age, like I'm a couple of years away from it. So, like, I've had a whole another nearly decade of experiences to sort of connect with the various points in her life, and so now there are things that I think move me in different ways about it.
Yeah.
I think we've got time for one last
It goes so
question.
quickly, doesn't it?
So if there's one there.
I really like the ending and how it's open for us to make up our own opinions, but I'd quite like to know yours, what you thought the cause of death was. Has it ever been found out? And if your opinion has changed since you made the film until now?
As what changed?
The cause of death, your
Oh, yeah.
opinion, and if it was ever found out, or, if your opinion's changed from then until now when you made the film?
I mean, because at the inquest, it was said that we'll never know, because she was so skeletal. And there was no cause of foul play, anything like that they could find. It was a really difficult film to finance. For those might have noticed that we had a lot of Irish input. That was because we in the end had to film it in Ireland. So we built the bedsit in Ireland. We had to do our post in Ireland because we found it really difficult to get the money out of the UK. And the Irish Film Board said it has to have it has to have something to do with Ireland. And we're like, what can that be? And they went, death. We love death. The Irish love death. And so that's how we got money out of Ireland. I forget the point of where I'm going on this one. But I think that what ultimately, as the years have gone by, I personally think that Dreams of a Life has survived and survives in people's imaginations, and I love that people are still discovering it, and it seems very resonant of the preoccupations of our age, and I think that it does that because it doesn't solve the mystery. It doesn't give answers that would only probably have been accurate isn't the right word, but it might have closed it down too much, and it might have seemed appropriate at the time, maybe satisfied more people at the time, but ultimately closed that story down. So over the years, I've become increasingly more pleased that it doesn't give answers, that it doesn't close down the conversation, because the conversations have to go on. And in increasingly complex age, when we're debating what is truth, and we are where we are, it feels like, to me, Joyce's historian, as people said, emerging out of Thatcher or something, emerging out of that time. It feels like she not wanting. I don't want to give her a kind of mission statement herself because it feels wrong, but I just think that she survives with the film. So for whatever reason the film has survived, it makes me really happy that people discover her and connect to her, and someone like Sophie, who saw it at the time, suddenly starts to relate to her. So as the years go by, I'm just very, very pleased I made it, because Cairo Cannon, the producer's here as well, and it wasn't easy because at the time people had an idea of how it should be made. So I'm glad we resisted that, very much so. But
That's all we've got time for.
Sorry
We've
it went
got-
so quickly.
We've got another film. Just about them. Really worried the ads are going to start any second. So, but thank you so much. For
And
taking
thank
the
you. And I
time
just
out.
would like to pay absolute tribute to Martin and Mandy. I think that's the only people here that are in the film, because people really put themselves on the line to be in a documentary and to be filmed, because they do not know what people will do in that edit room. They do not know what happens. So without Mandy and without Martin and the other people in the film, Dreams of a Life would not exist. And they knew her, and it was their way of paying total credit to Joyce as the brilliant and beautiful woman she was. So thank you very much. We should thank her.